Cyprus, 2004. A small island in the eastern Mediterranean, and a team of French archaeologists are moving carefully through a site at Chillerocambos, a Neolithic settlement nearly 10,000 years old. They are not looking for gold. They are not searching for weapons or pottery. They are excavating what looks at first like an ordinary burial pit. In the pit, there are two skeletons lying side by side. One human, one not. The non-human skeleton is small, the size of a large fist. The bones are intact, the body positioned deliberately, not discarded, not eaten. Placed. Someone had set this creature beside a person they were burying, and then covered them both with the same earth. The creature was a cat. And that single finding, a cat buried beside a human being in a grave that predates ancient Egypt by 5,000 years, cracked open what scientists believed they understood about one of the most common animals on Earth. The creature was a cat. And that single finding, a cat buried beside a human being in a grave that predates ancient Egypt by 5,000 years, cracked open what scientists believed they understood about one of the most common animals on Earth. What the team eventually found, after decades of excavation, genetic sequencing, and argument, is stranger than any myth ever was. The story of how cats came to share our world is not a story about domestication. It is not a story about humans choosing an animal and bending it to their will. It is a story about an animal that looked at what humans were doing and made a decision. The version most people carry is tidy, clean. It goes roughly like this. Somewhere in ancient Egypt, people began to keep cats, perhaps around 4,000 years ago. The Egyptians worshipped them, depicted them in hieroglyphs, protected them under law. The cat spread from Egypt through trade, through conquest, through time, carried on ships and wagon routes across the known world until it had circled the globe. The cat, on this account, is an Egyptian invention, a gift from the Nile to the rest of us. It was a believable story. It had evidence behind it. Egyptian art is saturated with cats, seated beside queens, crouched beneath chairs, locked in famous paintings hunting birds among the papyrus reeds. The mummies confirmed it. The laws confirmed it. And the narrative had an obvious appeal. Humanity as patron, nature as recipient. We gave cats a home. We gave them safety. We made them what they are. It seemed settled. The math seemed simple, but the burial at Chillerocambos had already introduced a number under the floor of the story. A number that shouldn't be there. A cat burial deliberately placed nearly 9,500 years ago. On an island. An island that cats could not have reached without a boat. A boat operated by humans. Humans who were transporting something they clearly valued enough to bury with their dead. One skeleton, one date, one problem that refused to go away. In 2007, a team led by Carlos Driscoll at the National Cancer Institute published a genetic study that proposed to solve the question of cat origins once and for all. Driscoll and his colleagues analyzed DNA from nearly 1,000 domestic cats and their wild relatives across 3 continents. The result was precise, unambiguous. All domestic cats, every tabby, every calico, every purebred Siamese on the planet descend from a single subspecies of wildcat, Felis silvestris libica, the Near Eastern wildcat, a small, solitary, sand-colored predator native to a specific crescent of land running from modern-day Turkey through Israel, Iraq, and Iran. Not Egypt, the Near East, and not 4,000 years ago. The divergence between domestic cats and their wild relatives based on the mutation rates in mitochondrial DNA pointed to a date closer to 10,000 years before the present. The precise period when human beings in that same crescent of land were doing something entirely new. They were farming. Here is what the researchers expected to find. Based on every prior domestication study ever conducted, evidence of strong human selection, the hallmarks of deliberate domestication, compressed genetics, dramatic phenotypic changes, the signature of people making choices about which animals to breed and which to cull. Every domesticated species showed it. Dogs, cattle, horses, pigs, chickens. You could read the human hand in the genome. You could see where we had pushed. What they found in the cat genome was almost nothing. Not selective breeding, not a bottleneck of controlled reproduction. The genetic diversity of Felis silvestris libica and the domestic cat was so similar that it took years of repeated analysis to find where domestication had even left a fingerprint. The only measurable signature of human selection across the entire 10,000-year history of the domestic cat was a handful of genes related to tameness, slightly lower fear responses, slightly higher tolerance of proximity, and a single coat pattern mutation, the tabby blotch, that appeared in medieval Turkey around the year 1200. 10,000 years of living alongside humanity. One coat pattern. No human hand is directing the breeding. No selection program. No one choosing which kittens to keep. Cats did not become domesticated because humans made them that way. Cats became domesticated because they decided it was worth the proximity. They walked in on their own terms. And for 10,000 years, they have never quite surrendered those terms. They are the only major domestic species whose genome shows virtually no imprint of deliberate human control. The Persian cat is barely older than the automobile. The Sphinx is younger than the moon landing. But the domestic cat itself, the shared ancestor of every cat you have ever known, predates Egyptian civilization by more than 4,000 years. The mechanism, when you trace it forward from the Fertile Crescent, is almost comic in its simplicity. And in some ways, it is the strangest of all. The first farmers in the Near East, approximately 10,000 years ago, were storing grain. Storing grain attracted rodents. Rodents attracted Felis silvestris libica, a specialist predator that had evolved over millions of years to hunt small, fast mammals in open scrubland. The wildcat did not approach the human settlements out of curiosity about people. It approached because the settlements were, from a wildcat perspective, the most efficient hunting ground in the landscape. The humans had built, without intending to, a permanent rodent trap, and the wildcats moved in to work it. What happened next is not that humans captured kittens and trained them. What happened next is that the wildcats who could tolerate the noise and the smell and the crowding of human settlements got more food than the wildcats who couldn't. The individuals with slightly lower threat responses, the ones who didn't flee at the sight of a person, ate better, had more kittens, passed on that tolerance. Over generations, the cats that chose to stay near humans became incrementally different from the cats that didn't, not because anyone bred them. Because proximity was profitable, and the cats who could manage it thrived. This is what biologists call self-domestication. The animal initiates the process. The human provides the conditions, not the intention. Scientists who study this dynamic have a specific term for the gradient between a truly wild animal and a fully domestic one. They call it commensalism, from the Latin mensa, meaning table, to share a table. The cat did not become our pet. The cat became our table companion. It ate from our surplus. It benefited from our structures, and it gave back, reliably, effectively, and entirely on its own initiative, the one thing farming communities needed most: rodent control. The relationship was never a contract we wrote. It was a contract the cat offered, and we accepted, mostly without noticing we'd agreed to anything. Almost impossible to picture a wild cat, striped, cautious, following a grain caravan from the Fertile Crescent to the Nile Delta 4,000 years before the pharaohs built their first pyramid, walking the margins, hunting the shadows. Then, another caravan moving west, another moving east. No one commanding this. No breeder, no plan. Just a small predator tracking the one resource it had learned to rely on: the grain stores, the settlements, the human spaces that generated rodents like clockwork. Carry that image forward 2,000 years. The cat is now inside Phoenician trading ships crossing the Mediterranean, not in a cage, but hunting in the hold, because the sailors brought grain, and the grain attracted rats, and the rats invited the cats, and no one thought to stop them, because why would you stop something that worked? A cat on a ship was not cargo, it was crew. Carry it another 1,000 years. A tabby sits in a Roman kitchen in what will become London. Another coils at the foot of a Buddhist monk in Tang Dynasty, China, in a monastery where the scrolls, the irreplaceable, hand-copied scrolls, needed guarding from the mice that ate the bindings. That same cat, or the genetic echo of it, appears in a Viking longhouse in Scandinavia, in an Ottoman palace in Istanbul, in the hold of a Portuguese caravel rounding the Cape of Good Hope. Every single one, a descendant of that Near Eastern wildcat that looked at the first granaries and made a calculation. And every single one, essentially unchanged. That is what the genome reveals. The tabby on a Viking ship and the cat in a pharaoh's court and the cat in your kitchen share a genome that is almost identical to Felis sylvestris libica. The domestication is skin deep, the tameness is real, and it is heritable, but it stops there. Below the surface, the cat is still what it was 10,000 years ago. A precision predator in a temporary alliance with a species it finds, on the whole, tolerable. This is the scale of the story. This is how far a single animal's decision carried. The credibility architecture that supports this picture is not one study. It is a decade of converging evidence from independent directions. The 2007 Driscoll study established the ancestral lineage. In 2017, the largest ancient cat DNA analysis ever conducted was published in Nature, Ecology, and Evolution. Eva Maria Geigel and Claudio Ottoni led a team that sequenced 209 ancient cats from sites across Europe, Africa, and the Middle East, spanning a range of 9,000 years. The results confirmed what the Cyprus burial had implied. Domestic cats spread in two distinct waves, first from the Near East outward through the ancient world, then a second, smaller expansion from Egypt approximately 1,500 years ago. The Egyptian wave was real. Egypt contributed to the cat's global spread, but it did not start the process. It joined it. The 209 cats from 9,000 years of human history showed almost no genetic change from their wild ancestors, except for a single mutation in the TACPEP gene that produces the blotched tabby coat pattern, first appearing in medieval Turkey. In 9,000 years, under the constant pressure of proximity to billions of humans, the cat changed its coat once. Agriculture itself had only just begun 10,000 years ago. The wheel had not been invented. Writing was 4,000 years in the future, and a cat was already sitting at the edge of a human settlement, watching, calculating, moving a little closer. The question worth sitting with: what is the cat on your windowsill actually doing? Not in the sense of, what is it watching, but in the larger sense. What is the arrangement? Are you both in? You have almost certainly described it at some point as your cat. You may have called yourself its owner. You may have assumed, the way most people assume, that the animal's presence in your home reflects your choice, that you brought it in, that you made it comfortable, that you determine the terms. The genomic record, the archaeological record, and the behavioral science all suggest something different. The cat tolerated you because you were useful. It stayed because the arrangement was profitable. The tameness was a tool it evolved to deploy, not a surrender it made to your authority. Cats are not domesticated the way dogs are domesticated, rewired at the genetic level to orient toward human social hierarchies, to look to us for cues, to need our approval. Dogs were transformed. Cats agreed to terms. The cat on your windowsill is not descended from an animal that humans made docile. It is descended from an animal that decided docility was worth performing when the conditions warranted it. Every generation since has made the same assessment, and the assessment has, apparently, been favorable. The relationship was never ownership. It was always more of a treaty. One party offering proximity in exchange for conditions it is found acceptable, and one party accepting without reading the contract closely enough to notice who had written it. Think about that burial in Cyprus. 9,500 years ago. A human being, interred with care, with ritual, with the deliberate placement of grave goods. And beside them, not beneath them, not above them, but beside them, as a companion placed for a purpose, a cat. We do not know that person's name. We do not know what they believed would happen after death, or whether they thought the cat would accompany them there, or whether the burial meant something else entirely that we cannot reconstruct. But we know that someone in the Neolithic Near East loved a cat enough, or valued it enough, or needed it enough to put it in the ground beside them and cover them both. And we know that the cat, the species, the line, the genetic inheritance had already been inside the human perimeter for centuries by that point, already hunting the grain stores, already deciding each generation that people were worth being nearby. Not because we were kind to them. Not first, but because we were useful. And somewhere in the long process of mutual usefulness, something that looked like affection developed, on both sides, in the strange, oblique way that cats permit affection. If you found the hidden contract at the center of this story worth your time, consider subscribing. There are more origins like this one. More cases where the conventional story has a number under its floor that doesn't belong. And the ancient DNA record is only beginning to tell us what it knows.